In a moment of personal privilege, I just wanted to say that I told Wilma a few minutes ago that it's been more than a decade since those size 13 size pair of hush puppies would mosey around the newsroom, and there's not a week goes by that I don't miss having a conversation with Doug Nye. He had this great down-to-earth wit. He was curious about everything and could talk about anybody and anything. We could discuss the Coach Morrison, Slim Pickens, Judy Garland. He knew about all of it, had incredible institutional knowledge. I was telling somebody the other day, we'd be talking about a game from 1968, and he could remember plays. He could remember who made what play, which quarterback threw to which receiver, who fumbled the ball. It was amazing what was in his head, but the best part of it was he was just wonderful to talk to. And now I'll turn this over to Bob Gillespie, who worked with him for 9 years.
Thanks, Cliff. I was asked by Mark Lett, excuse me, to help introduce Doug Nye today on the occasion of his induction into the State's Hall of Fame for what are, I assume, a couple of reasons. First, because I worked with and for Doug for 9 years, from 1979 until the record folded in 1988, and had him as a newsroom colleague and friend for more than 30 years up until the time of his death in 2011. The second reason is because I'm one of the few folks still around who remembers the Columbia record and remembers what it was like to work for a small but feisty afternoon newspaper and work for one of the best bosses I ever had in my life. Mark told you about Doug Nye, the writer, his storytelling abilities. I want to talk about Doug Nye, the boss, the manager of people, a man with a deft, sensitive touch at handling fragile reporter egos, one who was more interested in developing young writers into solid journalists than building a newsroom empire. I want to let you know about the Doug Nye who was warm and encouraging and a friend to his staff, but still demanded your best because he knew, with his eye for talent, some of which he found in some odd places, that you were capable of doing good work. My introduction to Doug came in the summer of 1979. I came to Columbia from Charleston on the recommendation of another great friend, the late Ken Berger, who had worked for Doug and was the first of many to tell me, if you can't work for Doug Nye, you can't work for anybody. We sat in Doug's tiny little office for the interview, and somehow we discovered that we had a mutual love of comic books. I know that's sort of an odd passion for a man in his late 30s and another in his late 20s, but it connected us, and Doug hired me over some other candidates who maybe had more of a resume, and I will never forget Doug for bringing me to what became a heavenly place to work. We always had fun, even when the pressure of work was at its highest. We also fought some turf wars with our neighbors, the state, and I take great pride in saying that we beat them on some stories with half their staff. That was a reflection on Doug and the loyalty he drew from what is quite honestly a hodgepodge of a staff. Consider. The record alumni included a former award-winning sports columnist for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, now an editor for the sports website Bleacher Report, a former military reporter for USA Today, and yeah, a few of us retired and repurposed reporters. That group also included a doctor, a New York playwright, a massage therapist, a former public affairs writer for Naval Investigative Services, an executive with Palmetto Health. You get the idea. We were a real mixed bag with different ambitions and skills, but with one thing in common, Doug Nye. The people who proudly call Doug their first and best mentor are scattered around the U.S. now. When I contacted a number of them last week, those who could be here said, count on it, and I've seen several of them today. Those who couldn't be here sent the remembrances of how their times at the record and with Doug shaped and enhanced their lives and their careers. I want to tell you what some of those folks said. Kathleen Warnock, who is a writer and a playwright in New York, said that after a couple of years in sports writing, she realized that she was drawn to a career in the theater, and she wanted to talk to somebody about it, and Doug seemed like the perfect guy. She said, I sat in his office and he told me he thought I had the makings of a good sports writer if I chose to apply myself. But he also said I clearly had a passion for theater, and if I didn't give it a try, I might be kicking myself in 20 years for not going for it. Then he said, of course, in 20 years, you might be kicking yourself for not staying in journalism. He made it clear that whatever I chose was up to me and okay with him. It almost felt like a parent's blessing. Bill Eichenberger, the editor with Bleacher Report, said Doug had a love for the record, for Columbia, and South Carolina. He could speak to the sports fans who were his audience because he was one of them. I'll never forget his, quote, I told you so, and the shrug on his shoulders on the Monday after the Gamecocks lost to Navy in 1984 to blow an undefeated season. Doug looked at him, palms up, said, "The chicken curse, what can you do?" Michael Hunt, the columnist from Milwaukee who recently completed a Master's of Communications at Columbia University in New York, said, "Doug always insisted that I wear a tie, but I only had one. So I went out and gathered a collection of them because that was the professionalism that Doug wanted to see in us." Now, what Hunt doesn't say is that in the fall of '79, we had to have our photos taken for mugshots for the paper, and only one of us remembered to bring a tie. So we took turns wearing the same tie for the photographer. And believe me, it was an ugly tie. You think this is bad? Not even close. Doug wasn't real crazy about that, but he laughed it off. Mike also tells of taking a chance on a headline one time because he thought that Doug, who loved Westerns above almost anything, would appreciate it. South Carolina was playing Oklahoma State, which all you football fans know, I'm sure, are the Cowboys. And South Carolina's pass defense played well that day. The secondary coach was named Dale Evans. So Hunt's headline was, "Dale Evans knows how to rope a cowboy." Mike said, "I figured he was going to spike that, but he just laughed and it ran." Bertram Ranton, who until recently worked here, said he would bring a tape player and speakers to listen to Christmas music at his desk in the newsroom. So when he was about to move over to sports, Doug called him in and said, "Now you will be bringing that music to the sports department, right?" Leslie Patterson, who also worked here, remembers Doug telling her, "If we don't have fun at our jobs, readers can tell, and they won't enjoy what we write nearly as much." Dave Moniz, the former USA Today writer, recalls Doug's hand-drawn cartoons on the sports department bulletin board. Usually they were about things that we had messed up on. And his stories about South Carolina's sports history because, as we all know, no one knew the stats and scores and stories like Doug did. Doug was devoted to the Columbia Record. Harry Logan, former editor at the Record in the State and in Florence, told about the blizzard of February 1973 that shut down Columbia. He said the snow was too deep for Doug's Volkswagen to get here, so he walked to work from St. Andrews. I don't remember if he caught a ride on the interstate or I went and picked him up, but he was going to find a way to get to work. Now, lest you think Doug was perfect, remember this. He also once hired a young medical student named Barry Magnus, who had no journalism degree, no writing experience, and as Doug later discovered, could not type. And then there's one of my favorite stories about covering the Masters tournament with Doug one year. On the Wednesday at Augusta National, Doug ran into one of the Gatlin brothers, the country music band in the gallery, and so his column the next day was about the Gatlin brothers and the band. On Thursday, he ran into someone else interesting in the gallery, and it was another off-the-course column. Friday was yet another interesting story, but still, no golf. The Record didn't publish on Sunday, so he and I drove back to Columbia after Friday's round, and I picked him up again at his house on Sunday. Doug looked at me and he said, "Have you talked to Charlie Pascal, who was our desk guy, about Monday's paper?" And I told him, I said, "Yeah, Charlie asked me to say, ask Nye if he's going to interview a damn juggler today." This was the man I was privileged to work for and to call my friend. He took his job and his responsibility to and for his staff very seriously. Himself, not so much. The state's Hall of Fame is getting a member who richly deserves induction, and Doug Nye would be the last man on earth to tell you that. So I will. If there's anybody who deserves this, it's Doug Nye. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce one of Doug's close friends and one of his heroes, because he loved the New York Yankees above almost anybody, Bobby Richardson.
Thank you, Bob. Well, those were some wonderful things said about Doug, and I want to just start from a personal standpoint. I retired from the Yankees in 1966, and that's when Doug came on board in Sumter as a sports writer. We immediately became friends, and we spent a lot of time together. And right after that, I became the baseball coach at the University of South Carolina, so we had a lot in common there talking. I think the thing that I remember most about Doug is coming over to my house, and Betsy and I were riding over here today, and Betsy, stand up and come here just a second if you would. And we had one little experience with Doug that I want her to tell me about. Now, she didn't know I was going to call on her. She's a real sport, though. She'll come. And just describe in 1 minute and a half one of the times that we had with Doug at our house when he came over and he was hungry.
Hi. It's just been a pleasure to be here today. And of course, Doug was a friend of ours. He was a reporter, yes, but a friend. And that meant a lot to us. And he came over one day and he was doing quite an extensive article, so he spent the day with us. Well, we have 5 children, and Robert, we have 2 telephone lines, and the front doorbell was ringing, the back doorbell was ringing, and half of the neighborhood was there. And Doug just took it all in stride. He was so gracious in interviewing, and I didn't know he was going to write down everything that happened. And he got hungry, and I thought, well, I didn't have lunch made. I can fix you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Well, I went to fix it, and I didn't have any grape jelly. So I had some strawberry jam, and I made him a peanut butter and strawberry jam sandwich. And he was very gracious and ate it, and that was in the article too. So his reporting and his friendship is very missed, but we are so thankful that we got to know him as a friend and also in his profession. We appreciate him very much.
Thank you, Betsy. Very well done. Minute and a half is good. Oh, that's good. 2 of my close friends are here today. Julian Gibbons. Julian was Sports Information Director when I coached at the university. Now he's Vice President of the big hospital that overtook our hospital in Sumter recently, so we're even closer friends now, looking out for each other. And Teddy Hefner, of course, umpired a lot of my games when I was playing and never missed a call, never argued with it at all. But Doug is why we're here today, and just 2 things. I remember that he wrote a wonderful book on cowboys, and I love Westerns. I have the Western Channel. I watch them often. And we often talked about our friends. I remember one time we were going into Anaheim, California. Just so happened that Gene Autry owned the Anaheim Angels, and he had a habit of coming into the clubhouse and thanking us for coming out, like it wasn't something we had to do. They were on the schedule. We were going to play there anyway. And he said to me one day, he said, "You know what?" He said, "Do you know Doug Nye?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do." He said, "Well, he's a great..." No, Cindy, I'm just kidding. That's not true. I'll have to confess, he didn't know Doug. What he really said was, I remember coming to Sumter to the Rex Theater and making an appearance there. And I, as a young boy, remember when he came to that theater that day. I just say that to say we've had some wonderful times together. So much good has been said, but I'd like to close with this. I'd like to thank his family for asking me to be a part of his homegoing to the Lord. I helped take part in his funeral. And I guess it was some years ago when my son was about 5 years old, and we were driving across the George Washington Bridge in New York, going to our home in Ridgewood, New Jersey. And my son had picked up mail that had come to me in the clubhouse, and he opened it up and he was reading, and he said, "Dad, here's a letter from Canada. It's written by a guy by the name of Walt Huntley, and he has a poem in there. And he says, I think you'll enjoy this, and I want you to feel free to use it anytime that you can." Well, I had Mickey Mantle's funeral on national television. I used it then. But I think here I'd like to close my remarks about Doug with the words from this poem. It was written by a friend to a friend, and I think it really says a lot. And it goes along with his induction today into the Hall of Fame for the state newspaper. It says, "Your name may not appear down here in this world's Hall of Fame. In fact, you may be so unknown that no one knows your name. The trophies, the honors, the flashbulbs here may pass you by, and neon lights of blue. But if you know and love the Lord, then I have news for you. This Hall of Fame is only good as long as time shall be. But keep in mind, God's Hall of Fame is for eternity. This crowd on earth, they soon forget the heroes of the past. They cheer like mad until you fall, and that's how long you last. But in God's Hall of Fame, by just believing in his Son inscribed, you'll find your name. I tell you, friend, I wouldn't trade my name, however small, that's written there beyond the stars, of the famous names on earth." And the last line, I think, says it all. I would like for my name to be there in God's Hall of Fame, and Doug's is certainly there. And as we honor him today, I just want to thank his wife, his family for their friendship, and I'd like to say he meant an awful lot to me, and I appreciate it very much. Now, I have an engagement at 6 o'clock in Sumter. I didn't know that it'd be quite this long today, and so Betsy and I will go get up and step out. We've got a baseball team that won an important championship, and they're waiting for me at 6 o'clock, and we're not going to be there at 6. It'll be a little bit after, but Betsy, if you'll walk up with me, we'll walk out. I don't know how long Mark's going to speak, but or Steve Brooks, I guess it is. Julia, make her come. See y'all later.
We are so glad to have you with us and your family and guests today. And it's been said already, and it's worth saying again, nobody deserves to be in this Hall of Fame more than Doug. And it's an honor and privilege to have worked with him and to have this day to recognize all the friends, colleagues he made here. Wilma Nye.
Some of you I know, a lot of you I don't know. A lot of you did not know Doug, some of you did. I'm sorry for the ones that did not know Doug. You missed out. It's been 5 years without him, and it's been tough, but he's with me every day. I can honestly say, and I don't know where Cindy is, but this is true. There is absolutely nobody, and there probably never will be anybody else that I, in my lifetime, will know that loved what he did more. In the article, Bob said that Doug was up singing and whistling. He was, because he woke me up every morning, singing and whistling. When we lived in an apartment in Sumter, when he first started, I had to remind him that we had neighbors. But that continued. It didn't, 30 years later, he was still doing the same thing. Didn't matter if he didn't have to be at the paper until 11 o'clock. He was out of the house and gone by 5:30 or 6 at the latest, and 6 would be late. So all the years that he worked, he loved it. There were times, he got aggravated, didn't like some of the things newspapers changed. He didn't like it. And he would come home and he would complain and he would fuss. But the next morning, guess what? He was awake, singing, and off to work again. That was Doug. He was happy. He loved his job. Above all, he loved his God. He loved his family. I have my daughter Hope is here today with 2 of my grandchildren, Doug's grandchildren, Kyle and Kristen. The oldest grandchild, who is a school teacher now, could not be here because of a teacher function. I have a wonderful son who, I'm sorry, could not be here, because if he was, you would see Doug standing here, because he is like Doug. Chris, he works for Lockheed Martin, and their interests are very, very much alike. He's a writer, he's a cartoonist, an illustrator, and he could tell you a lot more that I'm not even remembering. I didn't write a speech. I am not a speaker, so what I am saying comes from the heart. the special people that made a special effort to come today to honor Doug, I greatly appreciate. Kevin and Lisa, Doug's nephew, came from Charlotte. Doug's one and only sibling sister had, ironically, knee surgery and could not be here today, but she's here, just not in person. That's it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I sure will. You know, now I worked with Chris at the county. Oh, you did? Oh, I didn't know that.
We're just bonding. I'll just share that although I didn't know Doug, I was so fortunate that I think right out of school, Chris came to work at the Island Packet for us as a sports writer, and it just happened to be the time that I had twin boys in high school. Chris and I batted a lot of mosquitoes away and had a lot of good talks in the bleachers and basketball games and lacrosse at the lacrosse field, and I think Doug lives on.
Yes.
He's a great writer.
Yes.
It's nice. It's so good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
This is, Wilma, this is the front page from the story, press plate on the picture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.